more the questions becoming less suspicious and more curious. "What are you studying?" he asked one afternoon, watching as Clara showed Leo how the prism worked. "See speech-language pathology," she answered. "I'm in my final year." This clearly piqued his interest. "So this is a professional curiosity for you?" Clara looked up from the rainbow dancing on Leo's hand and met Dorian's gaze. There was a hint of the old accusation in his tone, the suggestion that this was all just an experiment for her. "It started as a human curiosity," she corrected him gently. "I saw a sad little boy and I wanted to see him smile. The rest, well, my studies help me understand, but they don't drive my actions." Her sincerity seemed to disarm him. He nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression replacing the guarded one. "His mother, she passed away 2 years ago. An accident. He hasn't spoken a word since. The day of the funeral." The confession hung in the air, heavy and raw. It was the first piece of his personal life he had ever offered, and Clara understood the weight of it. It explained everything. The doorless houses, the leafless trees, the profound sadness in Leo's eyes. It explained the fortress of Sanchi he had built around himself. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice filled with genuine compassion. Dorian just gave a curt nod, his emotional armor sliding back into place as quickly as it had fallen. But the confession had changed the dynamic. She was no longer just the waitress. She was now a keeper of their tragedy. The breakthrough when it came was not in the quiet, safe space of the diner. It was loud, chaotic, and terrifying. One Thursday, the stirrings were leaving. Clara was waving goodbye to Leo from the door. A small familiar ritual they had developed. Leo, holding his father's hand, turned to wave back a rare small smile on his face. In his other hand he clutched his favorite toy, the small silver Aston Martin, a miniature of his father's car. As he turned his grip, loosened, the toy car slipped from his fingers, tumbling off the curb and into the street with a metallic clatter. Time seemed to slow down. Leo's eyes widened in horror. A large delivery truck was turning the corner, its massive wheels just yards away from the tiny glinting toy. It was more than a toy. It was a totem, a link to his father, a piece of his ordered world. Dorian, distracted for a second as he unlocked his car, didn't see it happen, but Clara did. Leo stared frozen, his mouth opened, a silent scream forming, his body tensed, his hands clenched into fists. The truck was getting closer. The toy was about to be crushed. All the pain, all the fear, all the frustration that had been locked inside him for 2 years erupted in a single, desperate, explosive sound. No. The word was a strangled sob, a raw, rusty cry torn from his throat. It was loud and clear and full of panic. He lunged forward, trying to run into the street. Dorian spun around, his face pale with shock, and grabbed Leo's arm, pulling him back just as the truck rumbled past its tires, missing the toy car by a mere inch. The street fell silent again, save for the hum of traffic. Dorian was frozen, staring down at his son, his hand still clamped on his arm. Leo was trembling, tears streaming down his face, his gaze fixed on the small silver car lying unscathed in the road. But Clara was looking at Leo. He had spoken. He had shouted. The wall had been breached. She rushed out of the diner, her apron flapping around her. She knelt in front of Leo, ignoring Dorian completely. Leo, you did it," she whispered, her own voice thick with emotion. "You used your voice. You saved your car." Leo looked at her, his blue eyes wide with a mixture of terror and astonishment, as if the sound had come from someone else. He looked at his father, whose face was a storm of disbelief and confusion. Then he looked back at Clara, the one constant safe presence in his world. He took a shuddering breath, and another word, softer this time. A fragile whisper escaped his lips. Clara. He said her name. Dorian Sterling stumbled back as if he'd been physically struck. He leaned against his car for support, his eyes locked on the waitress, who was now gently retrieving the toy car and placing it back into his son's trembling hand. He had spent a fortune on the nation's leading therapists, psychologists, and specialists. He had subjected his son to hours of sterile clinical observation, and all of them had failed. Yet this waitress, with her napkins and paper birds and endless patience, had just accomplished the impossible. In that moment, watching her comfort his crying, speaking son on a busy city sidewalk, Dorian Sterling knew his life and Leo's would never be the same. The sound of that one word, Clara, echoed louder than any business deal he had ever closed. It was the sound of a key turning in a lock he thought was rusted shut forever. The days following Leo's outburst were a blur of cautious optimism. He didn't suddenly become a chatterbox. The word no had been a dam breaking, and Clara had been the first trickle of water. Now a slow, hesitant stream of single words began to follow, but almost exclusively for Clara. Milkshake, fries, bird, son. Each word was a precious gem, offered shyly when they were in their booth at the diner. With his father, he remained largely silent, reverting to his drawings and gestures, the familiar safety of his quiet world. Dorian Sterling, however, was a changed man. The icy indifference was gone, replaced by a desperate, hungry focus. He watched Clara with an intensity that was unsettling, as if trying to dissect her magic. A week after the incident with the toy car, he asked her to stay after her shift. The diner was empty, smelling of bleach and old coffee. Clara sat nervously in the booth, wiping her hands on her apron. Dorian sat opposite, not as a customer, but as the powerful CEO he was. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Maeve," he began, his tone formal. "I am prepared to offer you a job. Your responsibilities would be to act as a full-time companion and speech aid for Leo." Clara was stunned into silence. He continued, laying out the terms like a business negotiation. "You would live in our guest house. Salary I am prepared to offer is 5 times what you make here. I will also cover the full tuition for the remainder of your university degree and any postgraduate studies you wish to pursue. You can design Leo's schedule, art museum visits, park outings. Whatever you believe will help him. Your only goal is his well-being and continued progress." It was an incredible offer. It was a lifeline, a dream come true for a struggling student. It meant no more worrying about rent, no more exhausting double shift. It meant she could focus on her studies and, more importantly, on helping Leo. But a knot of unease tightened in her stomach. Leaving the diner, their neutral ground, and entering his world felt like a monumental step. The Sterling world was one of cold marble and silent corridors, not warm coffee and friendly chatter. "I don't know what to say," she stammered. "Say yes," Dorian said, a flicker of raw desperation in his eyes. "Please, nothing else is working. You are the only thing that has worked." Seeing that vulnerability in the unshakable Dorian Sterling was the deciding factor. This wasn't just about money. This was a father pleading for his son. "Okay," Clara said, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes. For Leo." 2 days later, Clara Maeve left the daily grind for the last time. The questions began changing. Dorian Sterling's sharp edge of suspicion was slowly softening into something else: curiosity. "What are you studying?" he asked one afternoon, watching as Clara showed Leo how a prism scattered light into rainbows. "Speech and language pathology," she answered. "I'm in my final year." The answer seemed to spark something in him. "So, this is a professional curiosity for you." Clara looked up from the rainbow glowing on Leo's palm and met Dorian's eyes. His tone carried the faint trace of his old accusation, the suggestion that all of this was just an experiment for her. It started as human curiosity, she corrected gently. I saw a sad little boy, and I wanted to see him smile. The rest, well, my studies help me understand, but they don't drive my actions. Her sincerity disarmed him. The guarded steel in his expression shifted, replaced by something quieter, more thoughtful. Then came the confession. His voice was low, stripped of its usual armor. His mother, she passed away 2 years ago. An accident. He hasn't spoken a word since the day of the funeral. The weight of it filled the air, raw and heavy. Clara felt her breath catch. It explained so much. The houses without doors, the barren trees, the profound sadness in Leo's eyes. It explained the fortress of silence he had built around himself. I'm so sorry, she said softly, her compassion genuine. Dorian gave only a curt nod, his mask sliding back into place. But the moment had shifted everything. Clara was no longer just the waitress at the diner. She was now the keeper of their tragedy. The breakthrough, when it came, wasn't in the safe quiet of the diner. It came in chaos. One Thursday afternoon, the Sterlings were leaving. Clara stood at the door, waving goodbye to Leo, a ritual they had developed together. Leo, holding his father's hand, turned back to wave, a small, rare smile gracing his face. In his other hand, he clutched his prized possession, a tiny silver Aston Martin, a miniature replica of his father's car. But as he turned, his grip loosened. The toy slipped from his hand, tumbling off the curb into the street. Clara's heart lurched. A delivery truck was turning the corner. Its massive wheels bore down on the small, glinting toy. To Leo, it was more than just a car. It was his totem, his anchor, a piece of his fragile, ordered world. Dorian was distracted, unlocking his real car, unaware. But Clara saw everything. Leo froze, his eyes widening in horror. His mouth opened. His body trembled, fists clenching tight. The truck thundered closer, the toy seconds away from being crushed. And then it happened. All the pain, all the fear, all the frustration bottled inside him for 2 long years tore free in one desperate, explosive sound. No! The word ripped from his throat, raw and jagged. A strangled sob, but unmistakably his voice. He lunged forward. Dorian spun around, pale with shock, and yanked his son back just as the truck roared past, its wheels missing the tiny car by an inch. Silence followed. The hum of traffic, nothing more. Dorian stood frozen, his hand locked around his son's arm. Leo trembled, tears streaming down his face. His gaze locked on the silver car lying unscathed on the pavement. But Clara saw only Leo. He had spoken. She rushed out of the diner, her apron flapping, and dropped to her knees in front of him, ignoring Dorian entirely. Leo, you did it!" she whispered, her voice shaking with emotion. "You used your voice. You saved your car." His blue eyes met hers, wide with terror and astonishment, as if the sound had come from a stranger. He looked to his father, whose face was stricken with disbelief, then back at Clara, the one constant safe presence in his world. Leo drew in a shuddering breath. And then, softer this time, a fragile whisper escaped his lips. "Clara." Her name. Dorian stumbled back as if struck. He braced himself against the car, his eyes fixed on the young woman kneeling with his son. Clara gently picked up the toy and pressed it into Leo's trembling hands. Dorian had spent fortunes on the best therapists, the most celebrated specialists. He had subjected his boy to sterile clinical sessions, endless tests. All of them had failed. And yet this waitress, with her napkins, her paper birds, and her boundless patience, had done what none of them could. She had broken the silence. In that moment, on a busy city sidewalk, watching his son cry and speak in Clara's arms, Dorian Sterling knew his life, and Leo's, would never be the same. The sound of that single word, Clara, echoed louder than any deal he had ever closed. It was the sound of a key turning in a lock he thought rusted shut forever. The days that followed blurred into cautious hope. Leo didn't suddenly chatter. But the dam had cracked. The word no had been the floodgate breaking, and Clara was the first trickle of water. Now, slowly, haltingly, other words followed. Not many, and almost always reserved for her. Milkshake. Fries. Bird. Sun. Each word was precious, offered shyly in the safety of their booth. With his father, Leo remained quiet, leaning on drawings and gestures. But for Clara, he tried. Dorian was transformed. Gone was the icy indifference. In its place burned a desperate, almost hungry focus. He watched Clara with unnerving intensity, as though dissecting her secret. 1 week after the toy car incident, he asked her to stay after her shift. The diner was empty, carrying only the lingering scent of bleach and old coffee. Clara sat nervously in a booth, wiping her damp palms against her apron. Dorian sat opposite her, not as a customer, but as the powerful CEO he was. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Maeve," he began, his voice formal. "I want to offer you a job." Her eyes widened. "Your responsibility would be to act as a full-time companion and speech aid for Leo," he continued, his tone clipped, precise. "You would live in our guest house. Your salary will be 5 times what you make here. I will also cover the rest of your tuition and any postgraduate studies you pursue. You may design Leo's schedule, museum visits, park outings, whatever you believe will help him. Your only goal is his well-being and progress." Clara was stunned. The offer was staggering. For a struggling student, it was nothing short of salvation. No more sleepless nights worrying about rent. No more double shift. She could focus on her studies, and on helping Leo. But unease coiled in her stomach. The diner had been their neutral ground. Crossing into his world, the world of marble and silence, was a different matter entirely. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "Say yes." For the first time, Dorian's voice trembled. A flicker of raw desperation burned in his eyes. "Please. Nothing else has worked. You're the only one who has." That vulnerability, breaking through his armor, decided it. This wasn't just about money. This was a father pleading for his son. "Okay," Clara whispered. "Yes. For Leo." 2 days later, Clara folded her apron one last time and left the daily grind forever. A sleek black car carried her to the Sterling estate. The wrought iron gates swung open like the mouth of a fortress, revealing a mansion of glass and stone. It was breathtaking, but cold, more museum than home. She was shown to the guest house, a sprawling cottage larger than her entire apartment building. Luxurious, yes, but isolating. Her first day was surreal. Dorian's sister-in-law, Amelia's younger sister, had been part of the Sterling household ever since the accident. Isabel had moved in after Amelia's death, slipping into the role of household manager and caretaker of Leo as though it had always been her right. She was elegant, with sharp, symmetrical features that might have been beautiful if not for the permanent chill in her eyes. When she looked at Clara, it wasn't with curiosity or courtesy, but with the cutting disdain reserved for pests that had wandered into her pristine home. "So, you're the waitress?" Isabel's voice dripped with condescension as she entered the playroom one afternoon, finding Clara and Leo sprawled on the carpet, coloring together. Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Dorian told me about his unconventional new hire. It's nice to meet you." "I'm Clara," she replied politely, extending a hand. Isabel glanced at it but did not take it. "I oversee everything regarding Leo's upbringing," Isabel said coolly, as though making a declaration of rank. "His tutors, his diet, his schedule. Any plans you may have will go through me first." Clara lowered her hand, realizing the truth in an instant. Isabel was the architect of Leo's suffocating world, the rigid routines, the endless specialists, the cold order that had stolen all freedom from a grieving child. She didn't see Leo's silence as the voice of trauma, but as a problem to be clinically eradicated. Clara's methods, gentle, playful, rooted in trust and creativity, were an open challenge to Isabel's authority. From that moment, the battle lines were drawn. Isabel wasted no time sharpening her weapons. She questioned Clara's choices in front of Dorian, her voice always clipped and authoritative. Is it really wise to let him spend all day just drawing? Dr. Albright recommended structured phonics drills. Or a trip to the public park? Seems like an unnecessary security risk, Dorian. The grounds here are more than adequate for fresh air. Clara refused to rise to the bait. Instead, she poured her energy into Leo. They built blanket forts in the cavernous living room, baked lopsided cookies in the marble kitchen to the horror of the staff, and named every squirrel in the garden as though they were old friends. And Leo blossomed. The single words that had once trickled out reluctantly became short, halting phrases. Yellow flower. Clara, look. Big dog. Each new phrase felt like a miracle. But where Clara saw triumph, Isabel saw betrayal. Leo, once docile and compliant under her management, was becoming animated, joyous, alive. Worse, his world no longer revolved around Isabel's structured schedules. It revolved around Clara. One evening, passing Dorian's study, Clara overheard Isabel's hushed voice, sharp as a blade. You must see what's happening, Dorian. She's not a therapist. She's a child. She's making him dependent on her. It isn't healthy. And what do you think her real motives are? A diner waitress suddenly living in a mansion? Isabel let the words drip like poison. You're wealthy, eligible, grieving, vulnerable. Don't be naive. Clara froze outside the door, her blood running cold. This wasn't just jealousy. Isabel was casting her as a manipulative predator, a gold digger who had sunk her claws into a grieving family. The malice behind it was suffocating. That night, Clara retreated to her guest house, a gilded cage at the edge of the manicured property. The estate's beauty felt dangerous now, its silence thick with unseen threats. She had come to give Leo a voice, but the sterling world was riddled with vipers, and they had begun to hiss her name. The days grew heavier. Clara could feel Isabel's eyes on her at every turn, a cold, watchful presence shadowing her work. Every success with Leo was spoiled by the sharp edge of resentment that lingered in the air. Still, Clara pressed on. She began weaving her formal studies more deliberately into her time with Leo. Word games disguised as treasure hunt. Storybooks read aloud with pauses for him to fill in missing words. His vocabulary expanded almost daily. And then, one afternoon, a question broke her heart wide open. Where Mama go? The words were whispered as they sat before a family photograph. Clara's chest tightened, but she forced herself to answer gently, truthfully. Your mama is in a peaceful place, she said softly, hugging him close. But she lives right here. She tapped over his heart. In your memories. It's okay to miss her. It's okay to be sad. Leo didn't cry. He simply leaned his small head against her shoulder, letting out a sigh that seemed older than his years. Unseen in the doorway, Isabel watched. But she didn't see compassion or healing. She saw an interloper daring to step into sacred territory. She saw a replacement. From then on, Isabel's campaign turned ruthless. Art supplies Clara had set aside would mysteriously vanish. Outings she had carefully planned were suddenly blocked by surprise tutoring sessions Isabel had arranged. At dinner, Isabel laced her words with venom. Did you notice how he clings to her, Dorian? He never clung to Amelia like that. It's as though she encourages obsession. Or, I found her notes. She's researching family trauma, paternal emotional detachment. Doesn't that sound calculated to you? She isn't just helping Leo. She's analyzing you. Dorian tried to resist, but grief had made him fragile. His guilt at failing Leo a wound easily reopened. He wanted to believe in Clara. The progress was undeniable, but Isabel's whispers festered in his doubts. Clara was an anomaly in his controlled, predictable world. And anomalies unsettled him. The final strike came on a rain-soaked evening. Clara had stayed late, helping Leo build an elaborate block castle in the playroom. When the final tower wobbled and collapsed, Leo burst into laughter, the kind of pure, bubbling joy that had been absent for 2 long years. Passing the open door, Dorian paused. For once, his lips curved into the faintest smile. Isabel saw her chance. Later that night, she entered his study, a file folder in her hands, her face grave with false concern. "Dorian, we need to talk about Clara Maeve," she said quietly. "I was worried, so I had my private investigator look into her." Dorian stiffened, anger flickering across his face. "Isabel, that was not your place." Her eyes hardened, unrepentant. "My sister's son is in her care. I had to be sure." And with that, she slid the folder across his desk like a weapon. The study had always been a place of silence and control, lined with heavy oak shelves and the faint scent of old leather. But tonight, the silence pressed down like a suffocating weight. Isabel's voice cut through it in smooth, venomous whispers as she slid a folder across Dorian's desk. "She's not just a struggling student, Dorian," she began, her sharp eyes gleaming. "Her father left when she was young. Her mother worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. They were evicted twice. And now? Student loans. Debt piling higher every day. She comes from nothing." Dorian frowned. His jaw tightened, but his voice was measured. "That's hardly a crime." "Of course not," Isabel said quickly, smoothly, her words coated in false reason. "But it provides context. Motivation." From the folder, she drew a final document and set it neatly before him. It was a printout of Clara's old university forum profile. A harmless page, until Isabel's hand had marked it with bright highlights. A question from a classmate read, "What's your dream job after graduation, Clara?" Clara's reply, written long before she had ever met the Sterlings, glowed under Isabel's yellow ink. The dream? Working with a high-needs pediatric case. A real challenge. Maybe a private role where I can truly make a difference and, finally be financially secure would be a bonus. Isabel's fingertip tapped the last few words. "Finally be financially secure," she echoed softly, like a judge pronouncing a sentence. "She's been planning this, Dorian. This isn't a happy accident. She saw you, a wealthy, grieving father with a vulnerable son. She saw an opportunity. The napkins, the smiles, her conveniently gentle touch. It's textbook. A long con." Her whisper coiled around his mind like smoke. "She's playing on your emotions. She's targeting our family. And you, Dorian, for a payday." Every fragment she laid before him was circumstantial, twisted into a cruel narrative, yet, assembled together, it painted a picture impossible to ignore. Dorian's hands hovered above the papers, his heart pounding in his chest. The memory of Clara's sincerity, her kindness, her patient laughter with Leo, all of it wrestled against the black and white evidence on the desk. But his grief was a raw wound, his guilt an open door. And Isabel's poison seeped in through both. A chill spread through his veins. The laughter he had heard hours earlier, Clara and Leo building their castle of blocks, giggling when the tower collapsed, shifted in his memory. It no longer sounded like joy. It sounded like a trap being sprung. Isabel saw the flicker in his eyes and knew she had won. The well had been poisoned. "What are you going to do?" she asked softly, her tone feathered with false concern. Dorian rose to his feet. His face was like granite, every line set hard. "I'm going to end this. Tonight." Clara was in her guest house, bent over her notebook, sketching plans for tomorrow. A trip to the Science Museum, the dinosaur exhibit. Leo would love it. For the first time in years, she felt something like hope. The coldness of Isabel was a price she was willing to pay for the light that now shone in Leo's eyes. A sudden knock rattled her door. Firm, commanding, like the crack of thunder. Clara's heart jumped. She opened it to find Dorian Sterling standing in the doorway, rain beginning to mist down from the sky, his broad figure cutting a dark silhouette beneath the porch light. His expression froze her blood. Gone was the man who had smiled at his son's laughter that afternoon. In his place stood a storm, his blue eyes narrowed to shards of ice. "We need to talk," he said, his voice flat, stripped of warmth. Clara stepped aside. Of course. Come in. But he did not move forward. He remained rooted in the threshold, the damp night air drifting in like a warning. There's no need. This won't take long. He held out a check. This is a severance payment. 6 months' salary. More than enough. Clara stared at the slip of paper as if it were written in another language. Severance. Her voice broke in confusion. I don't understand. Did I do something wrong? Leo is doing so well. Oh, he is, Dorian sneered. The sound was so cold, so venomous, it made her flinch. You've done your job remarkably well. A truly stunning performance. Performance. The word fell from her lips as dread solidified in her chest. Don't play naive with me, Miss Maeve. His voice cut like steel. It's over. I know everything. He stepped closer now, his tall frame looming over her. His words came fast, sharp, like lashes from a whip. I know about your past. Your financial desperation. I know this was never about my son. This was about you. This was your dream, wasn't it? Find a high-needs case in a wealthy home and secure your future. He threw her own innocent forum post back at her, twisting it into something grotesque. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. What? No, that's not. Who told you that? Does it matter? His voice was a growl. It's all here. The calculated kindness. The convenient breakthroughs. The way you've made my son completely dependent on you. You didn't heal him. You infected him. You made yourself the center of his world so you could get to me. To this. He shook the check at her, his hand trembling with fury. Every word was a blow. Her intentions, her compassion, her love for Leo, desecrated, defiled, turned into something ugly. That's not true, she cried, her voice cracking with anguish. I love Leo. You've seen it. You've seen how happy he is. I've seen a masterful actress, Dorian roared, his voice echoing in the night. You preyed on a grieving father and a traumatized child. You researched our family's tragedy and built your act to exploit us. You are a predator, Ms. Maeve, dressed in a sympathetic smile. He hurled the check onto the floor at her feet. It fluttered down like a sentence passed. I want you gone by morning. A car will arrive at 8. If you ever try to contact me or my son again, I will use every resource I have to destroy your career. Am I clear? Clara stood frozen, a sob caught in her throat, her heart shattered by injustice. She looked into his eyes, once filled with grief and fragile hope, and saw only hatred. Isabel's poison lingered in every word, every look. She looked down at the check. A fortune. And yet it made her sick. Payment for a lie, for a crime she had never committed. The tears she had fought to hold back broke free. They streamed down her cheeks, not just tears of sorrow, but of rage, of betrayal, of a spirit crushed beneath false accusations. Dorian saw the tears and mistook them for the crocodile tears of a liar exposed. His lip curled. Save it, he spat. Then he turned on his heel, disappearing into the rain, leaving her in the open doorway of her cage of gold. Clara collapsed to her knees. The rain fell harder, mingling with her tears as sobs racked her body. He hadn't just dismissed her. He had taken her kindness, her compassion, and branded it ugly. He hadn't just broken her heart. He had incinerated her spirit. At 8 sharp the next morning, a black car carried her away from the Sterling estate. Clara sat in the back seat, numb. The leather felt cold, alien beneath her. She had not slept. Her small suitcase sat beside her, all she carried away from a chapter that had nearly destroyed her. The check remained where he had thrown it. To take it would have been to admit guilt, to validate his vile accusations. Her apartment felt smaller than before. Suffocating. Her textbooks lined the shelves, mocking her with clinical words about empathy and therapy that suddenly felt like a cruel joke. She called her manager at the Daily Grind and begged for her job back. Martha, the kind-eyed woman who had always looked out for her, said yes without hesitation. Clara tied her apron once again, but it felt like defeat. Every child's laughter in the cafe stabbed at her chest. Every Tuesday and Thursday at 4:15, her eyes drifted to the door, foolish hope flickering, only to be crushed. Back at the Sterling estate, silence reclaimed the halls. But this was no ordinary silence. It was darker, heavier. Leo had woken to find her gone. He ran through the guest house, his small voice calling, "Clara? Clara!" Confusion turned to fear. Isabel crouched, her face composed, and told him softly, "She had to leave, darling. Back to her old life." Leo didn't believe her. He turned to his father, his wide blue eyes begging for the truth. But Dorian couldn't meet them. He only muttered something about a new tutor arriving next week. That was the last time Leo spoke. His silence returned, not the passive silence of trauma, but the active silence of protest. He refused to look at his father, refused the specialists Isabel hired, refused even the expensive toys in his playroom. Only his sketchbook spoke now. But the pages were no longer filled with sunny parks and playful squirrels. They were storms, black scribbles of rage and despair. He drew the diner, empty gray. The Sterling estate, a house with bars on the windows. And again, a stick figure with a brown ponytail walking away in the rain. On one page, he drew himself as a small bird trapped in a cage. Opposite him stood Clara, the sun, radiant, being pushed away by a looming dark shadow shaped unmistakably like his father. And in the mansion of stone and wealth, Dorian Sterling's world began to unravel. The days that followed were awkward, tentative, yet fragile with hope. True to her word, Clara did not return to the Sterling mansion. Instead, their meetings took place at neutral spaces. The park, the library, sometimes even a quiet corner of the diner during slow hours. It was unconventional, but it worked. Leo bloomed again. At the park, he ran across the grass with a kite in his hand, shouting single words that became two, then three, then full, stuttering sentences. He clutched Clara's hand as they explored the playground, his laughter bubbling up like a long-forgotten song. Each time he spoke, each time he shared a thought, Clara's eyes shone with pride. Dorian watched from the sidelines, humbled. He had once believed that money, status, and carefully chosen specialists could mend the rift in his son. But it wasn't structure or science that pulled Leo back, it was compassion. It was Clara, with her patience, her warmth, and her ability to see through the silence into the boy's bruised heart. For the first time in years, Dorian allowed himself to hope. But hope came hand in hand with fear. Clara still kept her distance from him. Her interactions were polite, but cool, always tethered to Leo. She never lingered. She never gave him even the faintest signal that she was willing to let him step beyond the walls she had built. And why should she? He had earned her distrust. One evening, after Leo had fallen asleep on the grass with his sketchbook clutched in his hands, Dorian found himself sitting across from Clara on a park bench. The twilight settled between them, heavy and unspoken. "I don't know how to thank you," Dorian said at last, his voice low. "For giving him this. For giving me this." Clara looked out over the horizon, her arms folded tightly across her chest. "Don't thank me, Dorian. Just don't repeat the mistake." "I won't," he promised. And he meant it with every fiber of his being. But he also knew promises from him were fragile things in her eyes. Silence stretched. A bird chirped in the distance. Finally, Clara rose and gently scooped Leo into her arms, balancing the boy against her shoulder with the ease of someone who had become his anchor. "We'll see you Thursday," she said simply, before walking away, leaving Dorian sitting alone with the ache of both loss and possibility. As the weeks passed, Leo's voice grew stronger. He began drawing again, not just sad shapes or lonely figures, but families, laughter, sunlight. One afternoon, he proudly handed Clara a picture of 3 people standing under a wide golden sun. Himself, Clara, and Dorian. She blinked at the image, her heart tightening. She had tried so hard to draw lines, to remind herself she was there for Leo only. But the boy's innocent drawings were bridges, not walls. Bridges she wasn't sure she could afford to cross. For Dorian, each session was a lesson in humility. He arrived early, stayed late, carried snacks and toys like an assistant, and tried, clumsily, earnestly, to show Clara that he was more than his mistakes. Sometimes she softened, her eyes meeting his for a fleeting moment that hinted at forgiveness. Other times she remained a fortress, untouchable. One evening, as Leo played with toy cars on the diner's counter, Dorian lingered by Clara as she wiped down tables. "I know I can't change the past," he said quietly. "But I want to change the future. For him. For us." She stilled, her cloth pressed against the table. "For us." Her throat tightened. She remembered Isabel's venomous words. Gold digger, manipulative, opportunist. The same lies Dorian had once believed. Did he think she wanted this life? That she wanted him? Clara straightened, setting the rag aside. "For Leo," she corrected firmly. Dorian nodded, chastened. "For Leo," he agreed. But the look in his eyes betrayed him. The seasons shifted. Summer turned to early autumn. Leo's progress was undeniable. His teachers at the small local school praised his newfound willingness to engage, to answer questions aloud. He even made his first friend, a little boy who shared his love for drawing. One crisp evening, Clara walked Leo back to his father's car after a library visit. The boy skipped ahead, clutching a book about stars. Clara and Dorian lingered by the curb, shadows stretching beneath the streetlight. "You've given me back my son," Dorian said softly. Clara shook her head. "Leo gave himself back. I only reminded him it was safe." "You reminded me too," he admitted. His gaze held hers, vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. Safe doesn't mean walls and silence. Safe can mean laughter. It can mean trust. Clara looked away, her heart pounding. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't what? Don't make this about us. I can't be that for you, Dorian." He exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. "I know. I won't push. But I need you to know you matter. Not just to him." Her chest ached at his words, but she turned away before he could see the tears glistening in her eyes. Months later, Leo's school held a small winter recital. The auditorium was filled with folding chairs and the scent of pine garlands. Children in mismatched sweaters shuffled nervously on stage. Clara sat in the second row, her hands clasped tightly. When Leo stepped forward, holding a paper star, her breath caught. In a clear, trembling voice he said, "This is for my mama, who's in the sky. And for Clara, who made me talk. And for my dad, who listens now." The audience clapped politely, but for Dorian and Clara it was thunder. Dorian's eyes glistened with tears he didn't bother to hide. He turned to Clara, his hand brushing hers on the chair between them. For a fleeting second, she didn't pull away. Their fingers touched, tentative but real. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a step. The sterling story was no longer about silence, manipulation, or grief. It was about second chances, about a boy who found his voice, a woman who found her strength, and a man learning, finally, to deserve both. And though the path ahead was uncertain, one truth was undeniable. Leo was no longer alone in his world. He had his father. He had Clara. And between them, the possibility of something stronger than sorrow, something that, just maybe, could one day be called family.